Now we're going to go through a set of trinomial questions and what that will look like for this section 4.4 when we put them all together. This video is titled as Difference of Squares and Trinomial. I am going to do them in two different parts though. So right now we're only working with trinomials, and actually you've seen this before. It's really just a reminder. Okay, so the ones that you learned already, it says when a is equal to 1. So what that means when a is equal to 1 is that the number in front here in front of the x squared is a 1. And so the way you learned to do that was to take the x squared and break it into x and x, or break up whatever the factors are. And then you want the factors of 20. And now we have a lot of them. We have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. So we want to pick the set of those numbers that will add to give me 9. And so obviously it's not these. I'm going to use 4 and 5. And I need it to be a positive 9. So they would both have to be positive. Okay. What that looks like for this section would be where you have to do two things. You always ask for a GCF. It's always the first step. So in this case, I can tell that there's a GCF of 20x. And if I factor that out of the first term, I'm left with x squared and then minus 11x and then plus 30. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is kind of forget about this 20x just for a minute. And I'm only going to look at the part that's underlined there. And that's going to be factors of x like that, or I'm sorry, factors of x squared. And then I'm going to break up my 30 into 6 and 5, because those would be the factors that would add to give me 11. But notice that I want it to be a negative 11. So the way I want you to learn to start practicing this is think about the outside term and the inside term. And if I take x times 5, I get 5x and 6x for the inside. And then I want to figure out what I need to do to get negative 11x. And in order to do that, both of these would have to be negative. So what I'm going to do is make my 5 negative and my 6 negative, and then I'm going to pop down this 20x here, because that is actually the full complete answer there. Okay, so let's see another way or another type of question. So now we have where this is already set up as a trinomial. There's no GCF. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start factoring using my factors of y to the 4th. Now that's going to be y squared and y squared. And I want my factors of 48 that will subtract to give me 13. Don't worry about the fact that it's a negative 13 right now. I just want them to subtract. So after working with a few of the factors, I get 16 and 3. And then I want that to be a negative. So let's see, it would be 3y squared and 16y squared. And in order to get a negative 13y squared, the 16 would have to be negative and the 3 would have to be positive. So I'm going to go back into my answer and make the 16 negative and the 3 positive. Okay, so we would think that we would be done, right? But actually we're not, because we have some difference of squares here. This y squared minus 16 is going to be y minus 4 times y plus 4. And that's just by knowing how to factor what's called a difference of squares. There is another video that goes along with that part. You can see it a little bit. So just go ahead and be aware in this section, you're not going to have to factor only once. There's going to be at least 2, sometimes 3 factoring methods inside of a problem. Okay, let's move on to number 9. So we're going to take out, I noticed right away there's a GCF. There's a GCF of 2x to the 4th, it looks like. So if I take that out of the first term, I'm left with x squared. If I take that out of the second term, I'm left with 4x. And if I take that out of the last term, I'm left with 21, and that's it. Okay, and so what I want to do is focus on that inside part, and let's factor that using my easier trinomials. I want the factors of 21 that will subtract to give me a 4. So that's obviously going to be 7 and 3. And I want it to be a negative 4, so a negative 7 and positive 3. Now I'm looking at that and going, okay, is there anything else that I can do? And in this case, there is not. So you would be done with that one. Okay. right, so now what happens when, this is what we didn't learn before. What happens when that number in front is not 1, where it's larger than 1? Now we've got something that I like to just use guess and check. So basically you're going to pop something in there, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you try something else. You're going to get enough experience that you'll be able to figure it out quicker as you go. The more practice that you do, the quicker you'll be able to get these. Okay, so I'm going to take my factors of 6, which are going to be 1 and 6 and 3 and 2. So I do have 2 options. I like to stick with what I call the most famous, and so or the most popular. So I'm going to use 3x and 2x. And again, we're just trying this. We don't know if it's going to work or not. Then we're going to take the 2 here, and the only factors of 2 are 2 and 1. So I'm just going to pop a 2 and 1 in there. So let's do it like this. Let's do 2 and 1. And I'm going to test with my outside and inside term. So here I'm going to have a 6x and a 2x. Now, is there any way for that to subtract to give me 1? That's what you're looking for. And we're looking at that going, nope, that's not possible. So we're going to cross that one out and say, well, that combination, that specific combination did not work. So let's try something else. So what we're going to do is try then, stick with my 3x and my 2x. And the first thing I'm going to do is flip-flop my 1 and my 2. That might work. Let's see. So we're going to get 3x and we're going to get 4x. Now we're getting somewhere, because those will subtract to give me a 1. So what I want to do is figure out what my signs have to be to get a positive 1. And in that case, my 4 would have to be positive, my 3 would have to be negative. So when I go back, though, I got to be careful, because wherever I multiply to get that 4, I need to make sure that's positive. So I have 2 times 2 that I multiplied there in the middle. That's what I multiply to get the 4, therefore that has to be positive. The other part would be negative like that. So your final answer would look like that guy. Okay, let's try it again. And these, again, are not in your workbook. These are just extra examples, so we can do the ones in the workbook. Alrighty, so we're going to take factors of 3. Luckily, there's only one set. That's 3x and x. Now, my factors of 8, I have 1 and 8, 2 and 4. We're going to pick the most famous factors 2 and 4, and we're just going to pop them in there in those spots. And then let's test it. So we're going to say, well, that's a 12x and a 2x. That's not going to give me 2x on the inside. Cross that out and try again. Sometimes you get it on the first try, and sometimes you don't. First thing I want to do is flip-flop my 4 and 2, and I would get 6x and 4x. That will give me a negative 2x. Remember, negative 2x came from the inside, as long as my 6 is negative and my 4 is positive. So I'm going to go back into where I had this set up, figure out where you multiply to get 6, which will be the outside 3x times 2. So I'm going to make that negative, and I'm going to make the 4 positive. Therefore, your answer for that one would be that. Okay, let's see what that looks like in the workbook. So these are the problems we're getting to once you learn those things. Alrighty, so let's see, always ask for a GCF. In this question, there is a GCF of 2. When I take that out, I'm left with 6x squared minus 11x minus 10. Okay, now I'm going to leave that 2 alone, and I'm only focusing on this middle inside part. I'm going to use, let's see, 3x and 2x for my factors of 6x squared. My factors of 10, I'm going to use 5 and 2 just to start. If that doesn't work, I have to use all combinations until I get something that works. I'm going to put in, let's say, 5 and 2. And then once you get good at this, you'll be able to think ahead to know where it needs to go anyway. So here, let's say I'm going to have a 15x, and I'm going to have a 4x. Now, according to what I know about integers, that's going to work as long as my 15 is negative and my 4 is positive. So I'm going to make my 15 negative and my 4 positive. And that happens to be all I need to do for that question. So not too bad of a question there. All right, so the next one, number 13, I do have a GCF. I know some of you have talked to me about not recognizing without the number that there's a GCF, but always look at the letters too. There is a GCF of x. And when I take that out, I'm left with x squared minus, 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. Okay, so again, I'm focusing on this inside part. I'm leaving the x alone. 4x squared, the most famous factors there would be 2x and 2x. And then my factors of 1 would be 1 and 1. This one seems also kind of straightforward. I would get a 2x and a 2x. And as long as they were both negative, I would get a negative 4x. So I'm going to make them both negative here. And it looks like that's all I have to do. Not too bad. All right, the next question, I'm going to take out a GCF of 5m squared, I believe. And if I take it out of the first term, I'm left with m squared. The second one would be 14m. And then the last one would be 49. Okay, now again, I'm only focusing on this part. So if I were to factor here, I would use m and m. Oh, I don't even have a first term, so that's good. And then I would use 7 and 7, and I want to make them both negative to get the negative 14. So there we have it. So if there's anything about this part that confused you or that you have trouble with, just stop it and then back up and or like stop writing and then back it up and just watch it without writing, and it might make a little more sense. All right, good luck, and show me your work when you're done.